Hello, thank you for watching and listening to Now Conversations, which is conversations with authors. I'm Lisa Marie Garcia, and I'm a book publisher. So I believe that I can ask the questions to the authors that only publishers can ask. So today we're going to bring online our guest, Patrick Greenwood. And we're very excited to have him getting up early with us because he's from Carlsbad, California. Welcome and good morning, Patrick.
Oh, good morning, Lisa. Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm very excited to introduce you to our guest today as an award-winning podcaster. You started writing in 2020. Your first book is just hot off the presses. It's like bread coming out of the oven. It just still smells so fantastic because it's just a new release coming out past November, Sunrise in Saigon. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. But again, thank you for joining Now Conversations.
Oh, no, thank you very much for having me.
Now, you do have a very impressive bio, which I didn't read, but we'll put it in the chat with degrees. Well, you have a background in tech like I do.
Yes.
So that's super fun. We might get to talking about that. But when people really get to understand how you live out what is important to you and what you've deemed that this is your life mission, it's pretty amazing. So let's just dig right in. You've got your espresso from your show and your coffee. There we go.
Gotta have it. Absolutely.
Gotta have it. I know. And my first book being, before I even got into publishing, being called Never Drink Coffee During a Business Meeting, all about my time working for Starbucks as a client. It's another thing. So we have our coffee. It's Saturday morning. Let's just dig in. So one of the questions I wanted to ask you, since, as I said, you've been working tirelessly on getting your first book out, Sunrise in Saigon. What motivated you to write that book?
Well, it actually started in the book itself. It actually picks up as the protagonist in the book actually starts about wanting to think about Vietnam back when he was 11. I'm old enough to remember the end of the war and everything, this sort of things that happened when it collapsed in 1975. So the book really was sort of a nonfiction, fictional kind of mix of my life. So there's some fiction in it, of course, there's some nonfiction in it as well. But in 2012 is when I actually had a chance to go to Vietnam for the first time. I was going there for more of a cycling tour. So I'm actually kind of a global cyclist. I take my bike everywhere around the world. And so I went there actually on a cycling tour, and I was so taken back by the country and the people. And just thinking this is going to be the most unfriendly trip in the world. You know, they probably still think the war is still going on. I found the complete opposite. The people were amazing. The food was amazing. The people's generosity, their kindness. And I captured a lot of that, very much in my first tour. And then in 2013, I went back again to invest in a water company to help, create some clean water to help children. And in 2014, I went back for the third time to kind of do some other work as well. But I was so taken back by the country itself. Then later on, as I sort of got towards the end of my technology career, I always wanted to be able to write the story about Sunrise in Saigon, about what the book, the whole history behind it and the story behind it. So I started writing it during COVID, like most people, when we were kind of confined to our couch in the back in our office. And I just started writing it. And it really kind of captured a lot of what was the first trip. And of course, it has some fictional romance and things like that in it as well. But really, it was just kind of wanting to capture my very first bike tour there.
I love that you're a cyclist, and your branding, and that is pretty fantastic. Really fun. So I want to ask this question not on publishing, but just regarding the country. So, obviously you said, you fell in love with the country, you fell in love with the culture, you went there 3 times. What would you say was the primary, like maybe on your first trip there, what did you notice is the primary difference culturally from that country versus the US?
Well, the first thing was the friendliness. I mean, even when you arrive at the airport, it was really kind of a crack. I actually put it in the book as well. It's kind of a crack up is that when you get off the plane and you go through customs, all the people have a straight face. I mean, literally, it's like no one's smiling until you get on the other side. And then you walk into the International Gallery and everybody's taking pictures. Yeah. And you arrived at the Academy Awards going, I'm just a guy. And people are like, oh, hey, and they want to get a picture with you. And I'm like, so you have to sort of understand kind of where a lot of the culture comes from. But even in the taxi line, the guy who was waving the taxi says, hey, can I get a picture? I'm like, sure. And he's like doing this. And so it was just the friendliness of people. And I really kind of was taken back. Even at the airport, I thought that was really fun.
I love that. I remember the first time I went to Ireland, for instance, and this was way back. And it was it is a completely different experience. And that's why, I encourage my daughters, and they have that travel bug, is you've got to leave
Get
where
out.
you're at and experience it. Right.
Exactly.
Okay. So back to publishing. I loved what you talked about with your book being fiction, nonfiction, a little bit of
Yes.
that. So one thing that we do is, we'll have authors that say, oh, I'm worried about writing about my sister-in-law, or I want to write about this, tumultuous thing that happened. What should I do with the names? And one thing that we tell them is, we say, write out the entire manuscript with the exact right names. Don't change the names, put all the facts in, put all the names. Then we decide, is it something where we need to change the scene so much that the real person doesn't know that it was them? And then do we go through and do a whole sweep where we, change Sally to Sherry, that kind of thing. And then the last thing, as this is a show for authors, is that then on the copyright page, there's something that says, this is not the exact verbiage, but it's something that says this may have true facts. It may not have actual facts. So you leave it very ambiguous, but it is something that happens. And of course, sometimes a find and a replace doesn't replace them all. And so that's why you have to have a good proofread, beta read, multiple levels of editing to find that. And we found it. We found it. We have never published a book that we've had an issue of it, luckily, but we've definitely gotten past some changes of editing to where we found it in another stage. We're like, oh, this is one of those names that's supposed to be changed, and it wasn't. Actually, just last year we found it and luckily caught it. So so that was great. So I always, like to know what the motivation was. What would you give your best advice for people that are just on the precipice of moving forward with saying, I'm going to do it, especially we're in still the first quarter of the year, or have been trying to get there or trying to get there. I speak with authors, I'm sure you have, that have said they've been working on the book for 30 years.
Yes.
What would you, how would you respond to that or help motivate someone in that scenario?
Great question. So really it kind of starts with the book itself on why you're writing it. And a lot of times when people lose the identity of why they're writing the book, it tends to cause its own obstacles, right? They tend to get unmotivated. They tend to say, God, this is taking forever. I forgot the story. I don't know what to do. It always goes back to the moment that you start writing it out. And it started with me when I first wrote the outline for the book, was I had to remember, why am I doing this? Right. And because you're right, there is a lot of fiction, nonfiction blend to it. And it's a very complicated writing structure, because I do have a lot of things in the book that people that know me read it and went, did that really happen? Well, that's part of the mystery of the book, right? I mean, and so when people that read it have come back and said, well, I remember that. And it's like, but you had to change the names to protect the innocent, all the other stuff. But part of it is also, you have to always have that reason of why you're writing it. And even when I was having my early struggles with the book and trying to come up with the fictional part of the nonfiction plot, or in some cases, the fictional plot with the nonfictional ending, and coming up with that balance, I often had to put the book down or put the manuscript down and say, I can't write this right now. I need to stop. And you should get used to saying, okay, if you're not feeling it, don't force it. And I have found that some authors that kind of rush through the book and they realize it came out not the way they wanted it. Well, it's because you probably lost the identity of why you're doing it. But I do have a chance in my podcast as well to really kind of ask that journey question. Well, what was your journey? And it's interesting. Many people said, I just wanted to write this book. I wanted it to come out. Let it come out when it should come out. It could take 10 years. For me, I wrote it in 3 months. I had the first draft done in less than 90 days because I was so motivated to wanting to write the story. And then it took, obviously, a year of the publishing side to have it actually come out publicly. But yeah, I think when people start forgetting why they're writing it, my best advice to them is put the pen down, put the keyboard down, go back to your regular life, and you're going to feel it later on to say, okay, I'm now ready to dive into it. And that's usually where people do their best writing as well.
No, it's good. And I love that you said, not to rush. I remember with my first book, there is a point, and I call it writer's fatigue. I'll tell, and even publishing fatigue comes in a stage with some of our authors where they're over it. They are over it. They are ready to publish their book. I've had authors that that don't even want to proof it at a certain point, and usually that comes after they've done the big lift, the heavy lift, we call it. And we're very upfront with our authors where we say, look, depending on the size of their book and the type of their book and whether they have started their manuscript or not, we'll say, okay, you've got 6 weeks of what we call the big dig. And that 6 weeks, like, what did you say, how many weeks it was? Sorry, that you wrote.
Several. It was actually, I wrote the first draft in less than 90 days.
Less than, oh my goodness. Okay. Yeah. So we might say, it's 90 days of the big dig, meaning we do something where we say butt and chair schedule, put in your calendar, your butt and chair time for those, 90 days, every Tuesday, every Thursday, your butt's going to be in chair and you're going to write. But what you bring up is important because you said, you can't rush it. And what if you're not feeling it? And sometimes you have to step away from it. Yes. 100% agree. And what we'll do to, counter that is we'll say, okay, stay in your butt and chair. That is your writing / book time. So maybe you're going to sit there and you're going to surf on the internet and maybe you're going to start to look at book covers, colors that you like, or, other things. So we'll give them other assignments to use because it's, for a good book, for a great book, for a great content, and for you to dig deep as a writer, you have to be in the right mental place.
Yes. Well, and that's interesting because that's sort of where, and you mentioned my logo earlier, Cycle Writer came about while I was cycling. And part of the whole point of the writing was, what did I see while I was cycling? Was I looking behind or was I looking forward? I was always looking forward. And so when you're thinking about writing, many times I have to get out of my beautiful, home office here in Carlsbad, California, and go down the street to my favorite coffee shop, in downtown, just to change the scenery. Sometimes I'll even go to a Carl's Jr. or an In-N-Out Burger. Good bird, by the way.
Okay. I tell you, I worked there. I know you're listing the top 2 hamburger joints to make.
Absolutely, you got to stop for an In-N-Out Burger, do a little writing in In-N-Out. Look a little weird, but that really is another way of writer breaking the mold. It's getting out, changing the scenery. Cycling for me, because I'll cycle everywhere. Sometimes I'll have my book in my backpack or my laptop with me. I'll cycle for 20 miles, pull over, and then just start writing. But that's another very important piece, because if you're still trying to maintain that perspective of what you're trying to write, many times changing the scenery also helps as well.
I love that. That's fantastic. Sure, definitely. Would you say, do you believe in that idea that everyone has a story in them, or how do you feel about that?
Absolutely.
Actually, why don't you? Yeah, go ahead.
Absolutely. Everyone has a story. Everyone has a story to tell. Everyone should have a story to tell. Everyone is a writer. They just don't know it yet. I think everyone that really wants to express themselves in their view. And I loved how you mentioned the fiction, nonfiction blend, because let me tell you, that is a really important thing that writers have to face, is saying you're about to put something on paper and you can't take it back once it hits the press. So you have to decide that this is how it's going to be. And there's obviously very positive side, and there's also obviously very fallout from that as well that will happen depending on how people interpret your book. Once your book hits the street, you're going to get 1,000 points of view in the story. But knowing that this came from you, it came from your heart and your soul and your mind and your fingers, be proud of that. And I have some writers that I have on my podcast that regret their book coming out. And I always ask him, why? It's your story. He goes, I don't like the way the story turned out. Well, sometimes we can't always dictate that, especially if you're doing nonfiction. But ultimately, you still wrote it. Be proud of yourself. And every writer should be proud of the fact that they get up every morning and they write, and they write well.
Yeah, no, you great points. And again, kind of going back to that point about not rushing it. And yes. I remembered from my own experience, as we were talking about the writer fatigue and the, publisher fatigue, I definitely experienced that with my book. And I was ready once we were content edited to be done with it. And I remember my excellent, I was very fortunate to have a very skilled content editor, which I always say is the gold of the publisher. Really, that is a very specific editing and writing skill that it doesn't grow on trees. I remember her saying to me, this represents you. Your name, Lisa Marie Garcia, is on this book. She said, this will live in infamy and all of that. Now, we do know that we can always do second editions and we can change things, but for all intents and purposes, it's 100% true. And I remember her saying, don't get this far and then give up. And I was I ran a full marathon. I used to be a runner, that finish line. I mean, you can see it. And that's what sometimes I'll tell my clients, we can see the finish line. It's right there. Don't stop and walk, don't not get there just because you're at that last stretch. Yes. So like you said, and don't rush it. it's important enough. But it's fun for us, because now as a publisher for now 7 years, is we've had these journeys with so many people that we see the similar characteristics,
Yes.
within them. So, with them and say, okay, it's all right. You're not the only one that's gotten here and all that. And as you talk about your podcast, I want people to know about it too, about how many authors you've interviewed. So you've heard some of the same things like us, like we've experienced it, right?
Yes, very much. So the podcast is called Writers on Writers over at Triple Espresso. I started it last year. It really was designed as a platform to give writers 30 minutes to talk about whatever they want to talk about. Come on and talk about your work, talk about your book, talk about your marketing, talk about your editing journeys, and so on. So I've had close to almost 40 writers that have come on the podcast, and I enjoy it. I do it every Saturday morning at 10 a.m. Pacific, and I do it on Wednesdays as well at 10 a.m. Pacific as well. And it really is a way of really, as writers, talking to writers and giving writers the venue to say, hey, tell me about your story. Let's talk about your book. Let's talk about your publishing journeys and things. And many times the writers need podcasts to be able to talk about after the book has come out, because you bring up a great story about how ultimately it's about getting to the finish line. But what really ends up being the true story of a book and an author is, what are you going to do after you finish the race, after you've put the medal around your neck? It's like, it's not over. You're now, what's your continuum strategy? How are you going to continue to keep getting the book out there in front of people? Because the journey isn't over just because it came out. It starts. And that's really where I think the podcasts are important to get writers on, to say, hey, get as many podcast bookings as you can, because you've got to tell your story, because there's a million other books out there on Amazon. How are you going to separate yourself? Right. So I created the podcast to give people kind of that platform to be able to talk about their stuff.
And it's a wonderful podcast. It's very conversational, easy to watch, easy to listen. So it's even one of those I've put on in my car and just listen to you. And it's so wonderful that you're offering that. And it leads into a question I was going to talk to you about, and that is something we learned early on when we first, and we talked about this. We both have a background in tech. So I was a tech CEO out of Pacific Northwest. I was saying that I have, most of my clients were in Southern Cal and Northern Cal, but we had offices in Portland and in Seattle. And so when I came into this industry, what I thought was the big event, just from the outside looking in, was, the book launch. And it's got to be huge. And our first book launch for our very first client, we had it in the Barnes & Noble store in North Tampa. And we had a line, no lie, from the back of the store to the front, to the door, cheers for us. We were doing great. And it was all about the book launch. But then I learned that's not it, because this is what I say a lot, after your friends and family buy your book, no one's buying your book unless someone's promoting it.
Correct.
Which is what you just say. And even though I say that to the prospective clients, potential clients, I still inevitably will get clients that publish with us, and we set them all up for their promotion, meaning, making sure they have all the tools, the one sheet, the headshots, the PR, the, press release and all that. And then we start to book them. Still to this year, we have clients that if they're not a bestseller in 3 months, they're unhappy, and we also, here's the reality. This is a show talking with authors. The other reality that we'll have clients that won't work with our team for, just even the simplest things. Say, hey, I've got a booking for you. I need to know. Otherwise they're going to give away the space, or I'll give it to another client that maybe will get back to us in a week. Sorry, it's gone. But then they wonder why their book sales aren't great when it's down the road.
Yes.
And it makes me scratch my head.
Yes. Yeah. Having that continuum. And I talk to fellow writers as well. And I ask them, what's your continuum? And they're like, what do you mean? I go, well, the book came out, but what's your continuum? What's your plan? And how are you going to keep it in front of people, for a period of time? And it's interesting how so many of them are, and you mentioned fatigue. Many times people are so tired and burnt out by the time they hit launch date that they don't have the energy to go the next 6 months or budget, more importantly, budget, because it does cost some money to PR yourself, and you got to get, it's not everything is for free. You have to pay for ads on YouTube and others to, get your stuff out there. But it's interesting how you really want to set that writer up with success, to say, okay, the launch is going to be this date. However, the December plan is this, the January plan is this, and so on. And they realize that it's going to be a 6-month journey after the release date to really see success in having the book get well reviewed, you got to nominate your book for awards. You got to, get, it's like the Academy Awards. You got to take a full page ad out. You got to let people know that you got to get some noise going. And sometimes people don't have the energy to actually do that. So that's why I think these podcasts are really good to give people that continuum.
Yeah, no, for sure. And you say, I remember that, and I will tell authors, you said 6 months. I really tell them that you're not going to really get traction for about a year. Again, that's varied on what your level of activity, but we learned that right away, because almost a year to the date of one of our early books, we get an order for a bulk buy. And at the time it was the largest order we had gotten. And it takes a while, it takes all of that to come together. So we say a year. I also love that you said, nominate yourself. So something which you have to, and there's just like everything, and digital marketing is getting, more and more aggressive, and there's more and more people jumping on board. You really have to also, vet out the opportunity. As you know, it seems like right now what's trending is the digital magazines, right? Everyone is offering you to be in the digital magazine. Well, as soon as you ask the question of what is the cost, is there a cost? I guess is the first question.
There is. There always is. Yep.
Right. What is the cost? What is the, exposure? What is, let me see your press sheet, which again, you don't know if that's true or not. Unfortunately, people can say it's going out to 30. I know of a magazine. I ended up buying it so I could see, what the quality was of it. But, it boasts, gazillion users and print. And then I talked to someone that's been in it. Have they gotten even one client from it? You have to really net it out and be prudent. But you also, on the other side, you need to have a budgeted amount of money that you say, okay, here's what I will try.
Yes.
And we'll see to a certain dollar amount, right? As opposed to, no, if it costs anything, I'm not going to use it.
Agreed. And that's important to know that. And I love your analogy of magazines. I actually made the heinous mistake of hiring a PR firm out here. And it cost me a considerable amount of money, but with the promise of them, they promised them to me that they were traditional. They were not online. They were not podcast driven. They were about getting you into the New York Times and Washington Post. They didn't deliver on any of that. All they delivered on was just booking me on podcasts that had less followers than I did. And so that does happen in this industry. You will have somebody promise you. You'll get a lot of stuff on Instagram saying, hey, give me $60 and I'll get you 100 followers for your book. It's all fraud. So there is a lot of that manipulation happening, and you just have to kind of not only understand that does exist, but you also have to network with people. That's why, Lisa, that's really love what you do, is that you network with writers often to say, look, I'm going to help you with your journey, because let me tell you, it is a little crooked out there. It is a little, sideways, but you have the ability to help people navigate. And I think the one thing you do really great with your writers is you really help navigate them to say, you shouldn't do that publication. It's not the right publication for you. You should be coming over here, and really help people realize that it's going to take a year to get the full exposure you're hoping for. But every month we're going to do something here. We're going to do a little something here, do this. And if people realize that's part of the journey, as they're writing their book, they should be inspired that they have a plan, not just simply saying, it's over. No, the book's never over. Someday someone's going to buy it, but you got to keep putting your name out there as well, but do it in the right way as well.
Yeah, no, you do. I even had a client last year that went out and spent $1,500, hired a gal in the UK that promised PR, promised all this. And I've been working with her. I don't know why she didn't ask me first to, she already did it by the time she told me. So I said, okay. And my advice would be, what are you getting for that $1,500? Because like you, I did the same thing with my first book. I spent probably $15,000 on about 3 or 4 PR agencies. I didn't know PR agencies. I didn't even, why in tech, I never needed one. And this was, way back. But I spent all this money because my publisher said, go and now market your own book, hire a PR agent. And I ended up firing them all. It taught me PR, reading PR books. And I remember firing my last one. I was in Salt Lake City, and I got myself on the TV morning show and said, you're fired, and had to learn. But what I mainly learned was, you need to get whatever you're paying for, get it in writing. If you're going to pay for, like you said, the reviews, and I've paid for ones that were fake, say, are they real life people? We both know Google reviews they are completely can be fraudulent. That's why cyberbullying and all that. In fact, I think you even said, and I was going to bring this up if we have time. We might not have time. Where are we at? Oh, we're running out of time. You've gotten reviewers that have never read your book. It's obvious. Yes. They're just haters out there that are just looking for targets.
There is. And that's why it's important to really work with your publisher and build a plan with your publisher. It's not just about writing it and editing it and making a cool little cover. It's really about talking about, okay, what's the continuum strategy beyond the release date? What are we prepared to do in the first few months? And I do like to see authors that do have a plan. Some like to do public appearances, others do podcasts, others write blogs to keep their content fresh. And I think these are strategies that work. Getting on Goodreads is probably one of the most underutilized sites. For $99, you can get a book giveaway and draw in 3,000 people to your book for $99. People don't realize that that's available to them, that they can do that. So it is good to have a good publisher like yourself really helping people set the reality of you're not going to be Hemingway or Danielle Steele on day one, right? However, just like them, their book was their journey. And I'm going to help you with that journey. And I think that's what really makes Now Publishing very strong as well.
Oh, you're so very nice to us. Thank you. But it is a journey, and especially for a debut author. As a debut author, you don't know the publishing industry, just like I didn't 7.5 years ago now.
We were tech. We were doing tech.
I know, right? And that was it kind of before the internet? Al Gore invented the internet? No, just kidding. But I know floppy disks, and I just laugh. I have 2 teenage daughters, and what's a cassette tape? It's fun. Change is fun, and now we're all tech. Now we all have to be tech. Period, and it's great. Especially, I'm like in love now with AI chat.
Yes.
Have to say, love it. But all right, so we're getting towards the end, and I think that one of the best pieces of advice is you letting clients know and potential writers know it is a journey. It is something you take it at your own pace. You get some trusted expertise to help you. But thank you for that. And tell everyone how we can buy Sunrise in Saigon. I was just telling you that I need to flip my devices to buy mine this morning so I can get free Amazon Prime shipping. But tell everyone how they can connect with you and how you can just be wonderful and help them.
Absolutely. So Sunrise in Saigon is available on Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, Kobo. Any on-time retailer is carrying the book today. It's been since it came out in Kindle, has hardback, softback, and the audiobook will be coming on Audible probably in the next 2 months as well. You can catch me everywhere on social media. Type in Patrick Greenwood, Sunrise in Saigon. You'll see me on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube channels, pretty much everywhere across the board as well. The other thing also I definitely encourage the writers to do, and a lot of people ask this question, is what was some of the other motivations of the book? And as you'll read in the book, the proceeds of the book actually go to Helmets for Kids in Vietnam. That is actually a charity that I sponsor, not only through my book sales, but the helmet itself actually, proceeds actually make these helmets for kids, and they get distributed free throughout Vietnam to help keep children safe as well. What makes this really interesting, by the way, is this helmet is the international ambassador to Helmets for Kids Vietnam is none other than Michelle Yeoh, the movie star. So she actually became the global ambassador in 2019. And President Bill Clinton, I think, actually started Helmets for Kids in 2000 as well when he was in Vietnam. So it is a very long established charity that's done great work as well. So not only does my book sales, but also my coffee sales actually also go to support Helmets for Kids as well. So, and I think that's another thing that if writers really want to make a connection is find a cause that you really truly believe in and make that your benefactor. And that's another thing I found is that every day I write and every day I do a podcast or promote it, whatever, it really helps drive more opportunity for me to be able to contribute more to these charities. So it is nice to give, but the nice thing is to see these helmets actually on children's heads and having people know that you made a difference to your writing is another way to keep you motivated as well.
Thank you, Patrick. I put the Helmets for Kids and buy your Sunrise in Saigon book. And thank you again for being a guest. And I'm excited for more and more people to get to know you. So thank you for being on Now Conversation. Happy Saturday, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you all. Have a good day.